has come to play. He's the biggest of them all. Step back, 4-3. Phoenix forced a turnover at halfway. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Clock at 10. Adams the off balance. Oh my goodness. 2 on the clock.
Hello and welcome back to the Basketball Fix podcast. My name is Ryan. I am the host of today's show. We are going to dive into the Sydney Kings for the NBL25 preview. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the Kings, I want to just hear from you boys, Josh and Jeremy. The Olympics are done and dusted now. All focus towards NBL25. How are you feeling, Josh?
Yeah, very good, mate. And looking forward to diving into the NBL even more now as the season fastly approaches as well. And it's going to be a big season. NBL 25 may be the biggest NBL season we've had just yet. And there's some massive names who have returned, which I'm looking forward to touching on in this particular team. And it's obviously going to be a very intriguing season because obviously Jez is the Tasmanian Jack Jumper. I'm a Perth Wildcat. You're a sort of adopted Adelaide 36ers, which I think will change before the season even starts.
That's what you said at the start, Ryan. Don't try and hide it now.
I might be feeling the Hawks, maybe. The Hawks.
Yeah. Own your mess, mate. Own your mess is all I'll say.
Right,
but
it's a true Adelaide 36er dodging that is an Adelaide 36er fan.
Sounds like a typical Los Angeles Clippers fan as well, boys. But it's going to be very interesting, obviously, to get talking more NBL. And what about yourself, Jez? How you been, mate?
Yeah, man, I've been really good. I'm pumped. It's getting closer. There's like you said, there's just signings coming in from everywhere right now. We're locking in the final pieces of the season, and it's going to be a cracker. I'm so pumped. It's going to be such a good year, and it's tough to even put in some sort of early tips of who you think's going to win because there's just been so much movement, and it's going to be awesome. We'll see. Back to back, baby. Back to back.
Speaking of tips, we will be throughout the season having a little segment about our tips. Jez and I put most of our time towards writing and studying games to give our best tips. So check that out as the season approaches. Now, today's episode is about the Sydney Kings, a team that went out in the play-in tournament last season against the Breakers, failed in their their push for a three-peat. Josh, how do you reflect on the Kings NBL 24 campaign?
Yeah, you just mentioned it there, mate. The push for the three-peat, which I don't think's been done many times in NBL history. And we've spoken about it at length, obviously, in terms of, those three-peats within the NBL. They're incredibly hard to do because, you've got major turnover every single season. There's imports flying out. There's local players potentially going to the NBA, Europe, all that sort of stuff as well. So, they had a massive chance to do so. And, they look at a guy like Jalen Adams, who they brought back in. I thought at the start of the year, wow, this team is going to be pretty dangerous in terms of, having another chance at maybe actually going for that three-peat as well. They brought in DJ Hogue, who is a superstar player for the Cairns Taipans the season before. Denzel Valentine, who I think many people sort of were on the same boat as me last season when they said, this guy is he's going to rip the NBL apart. And I just think for whatever reason, Coach Mahmoud Abdel Fattah, we've had a lot of discussions about him over the journey. I just don't think he was the right man for the job. And I've got a few thoughts about their minority owner now, but obviously last season was the majority owner in Paul Smith as well. I think that guy needs a serious rehabilitation or even coaching therapy, I think, mate, going forward, because he needs to understand that the franchise is not about him. It's about the actual overall product, and I think he got a rude awakening last season, boys. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how they kick back and bounce back in NBL 25.
Well, Jez, hard to follow that one up. Any sort of reflection on the Kings season last year?
Yeah, I just think it was always going to be tough, the three-peat, like you said, and it was almost they had such an overhaul of their roster. So it is always the risk bringing in, a couple of new imports that try and sort of fit into the system, and it just really felt like they struggled as a group last season, obviously because they were all new and there was so many different faces in there. So, and then we've seen sort of another little overhaul again this season, but I think this year it does look a little bit more positive and with a little bit more stability, which we'll obviously go into. But yeah, it was always going to be tough for a three-peat. And yeah, I wasn't surprised that they did go out against the Breakers, and it was sort of fitting, I think, because that's exactly how their season was. Had a little push to the end, and then crashed out very hard on the back of a great performance from Jackson, Parker, Cartwright. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Their season ended abruptly, and so it should have, I think.
It is difficult, obviously, to keep performing at an elite level that the Kings have been at, and we've seen it across the board for multiple teams in the NBL over the past 20 years. Teams going a little bit up and down, but the Kings have at least managed to stay at that mediocre level, which we enjoy as supporters of other teams in the NBL. As you alluded to there as well, boys, for anybody listening, you can find the team previews for all of the teams of NBL on our YouTube channel, on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to check out thebasketballfix.com as well. Now, if we're looking at NBL25, we need to check out, okay, who have the Kings lost and who have they gained? I want to focus first on the player, excuse me, the player movement out of the Kings, and something that is, you've already touched on it here. Multiple players that have left. I want to go first, probably to Josh, and talk about Jordan Hunter. How do you kind of think that that missing piece for the Kings will affect them?
Yeah, I'm going to throw two guys in the same category here, and it's Jonah Bolden and Jordan Hunter. Now, I want to touch on Jordan first, and we've already sort of touched on exclusively Jonah Bolden, obviously what he will bring to the New Zealand Breakers in last episode. So if you want to hear an in-depth discussion about that more, go listen to that one. But they've lost their 1-2 punch at the centre position. So they roughly played about 19.5 and 21.5 minutes per game for their teams. So for the Sydney Kings last season. So very different players. Jonah was more of an outside threat, and Jordan was more of an inside, player. And I think obviously he learned throughout the end of the season that he actually has got the confidence and the ability to knock down the 3-point shot. So it's going to be interesting because we look at Hunter last season as the sort of number one guy, you could say. He averaged 10.3 points per game, 7 rebounds and 1 assist, whereas Jonah Bolden was 8.5 points per game, 6.4 rebounds and 1.1 assists per game as well. So pretty similar stat lines, obviously, for both of them. And I think they're both going to be missed tremendously this season because I've touched on with Jordan as well in the Southeast Melbourne sort of season preview as well. He's a guy that is tough to replace in terms of what he can bring, and he's still a young player. So he's got a lot of development to go. Jonah's a little bit older. In terms of what I think the Sydney Kings have been trying to build this offseason with some of the ins that they've brought in, which we'll touch on very soon, I think losing him is really going to hurt them. But the thing is, they weren't able to give him that role that he desperately, I guess, wanted, and I guess has really earned over these last couple of seasons as well as the Sydney King, because we've seen him develop from a very low rotational bench player to a 6-man to a now starter and a very solid player in the NBL in a 3 or 4 year period. So he's a major loss for the Sydney Kings. I don't know if they're going to be able to sort of replace what he can even bring, even as a backup center. I think there's a lot of questions because he's just the most solid, I guess, output backup sort of defender, rebounder, scoring center that there is in the NBL, especially as a local player. So it's going to be very interesting. I think both of them are massive losses, though, going into NBL 25, and it's going to be interesting to see how they've replaced him when we start talking on some of their ins.
They lost quite a few imports as well, right? Was it two of the 3 imports that they?
Yeah, 2 imports. Yep.
Yeah, Jez, I know that you're across the border, kind of all of these. I just want to get a quick reflection on just the concept of. I know you've spoken about it in previous episodes, just the ins and outs of the imports in general, how that affects the team, and then obviously after that, throw to Josh and see his take on the players themselves.
Yeah, well, I think that the whole concept of the imports, it makes things really tough. Like, you want to see more so that in the case of like looking at, say, what Jalen Adams is, he's obviously their number one scorer. He was their number one guy, and they keep him for another year. It is really, really hard to bring in these imports. They're usually coming in on a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal, but the second year is an option, obviously, because you're just trying to see how they go. But which does make it tough. It's hard to build chemistry and to really sort of yeah, build an organization that's going to be strong every year, because you obviously want to keep the core of your players from year in and year out. And when you've got these guys coming in from on a 1 year deal and it doesn't work out and they're gone, or maybe they're uncomfortable and they don't want to take their second option, or the team doesn't want to take that second year option. I think it's a difficult process, and it's obviously you want to give some guys a little bit more time, but it is a business and you got to make sure that they're performing. So yeah, I think it is really, really tough. Yeah, it's tough to get what you want out of your imports, especially when you're only sort of giving them 1 year. I think you should be trying to keep them on these 2 year deals and see how it plays out. But if they're not performing, it's certainly very quick to move on. But yeah, Josh, what do you think about that, mate?
Yeah, I've obviously spoken about the import sort of, I guess, structure that's really important to succeed in the NBL. I think the three words that I'm going to say, and they're the exact same word: money, money, money. So money makes all of your problems go away. And I know people obviously say money doesn't make me happy. Well, it might not make you happy, but it makes your life a lot easier, doesn't it, boys? So, when you've got more money, you've got a lot and a bigger chance of having success in the NBL, especially because teams obviously are happy to pay the luxury tax if they're thinking that they can potentially win an NBL championship and thinking about the extra money that can come in from that. But I think another thing that is obviously very important when we are touching on import movement, because it is a major factor, obviously, with teams having success or not having success, but it also does come back down to having strong local players. So the Sydney Kings typically over the last couple of seasons have had a very good, strong core of local talent. The Jordan Hunters, Angus Glover, you've even looking at a guy like Jalen Galloway. There's a lot of names you can throw in there. Sean Bruce is another one as well. They've had a really good core 4 or 5 players who each season don't even ever look like leaving. And that's really important to a franchise. You look at the sort of team that Melbourne United have built over the last couple of seasons, Perth Wildcats, Tasmanian Jack Jumpers especially. If you've got the strong core of local talent, it doesn't really matter what imports come in, because they're just filling needs and not really filling, I guess, a whole sort of taking the sort of weight of a franchise on as well, if that makes sense as well. So I just think that's what's really important. But yeah, Jez, have you got some other thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, but it's more just obviously when you're paying this big money for these imports, how do you go about? You look at teams. Say, perfect example for you is the Perth Wildcats. You've got Bryce Cotton. You can build your whole team around one of these import players, but they have to be obviously in it to be settled in Australia and to be and to play on past these sort of contracts, these short-term contracts. How does the team sort of go around doing that? Like, you've got to find this one, I don't know, it's like a needle in a haystack almost, and look for someone that obviously wants to be in Australia for one permanently and not just going around trying to chase the cash. Because you can imagine in a lot of these interviews when they're going up with the GMs of these teams and they're saying, yeah, I want to be this guy, but it's all like bull because they just want to get paid now. So how do you sort of come around that? How do these teams find these imports that actually do want to stay and do want to play on and work on obviously building a team and being a franchise guy instead of just a 2 year player,
Yeah, I think it does come back to the money as well. And I think it's why they structure their deals, especially as import players, the way they do, the 1-and-1 sort of deal. So obviously the first year is either a player or team option. So you get that first season to see, hey, is this player any good? And you can have a really good assumption very quickly of obviously this guy could be a franchise player. So when I think of the NBL right now, there are 3 guys that come to my head straight away in terms of players who have been loyal to their teams for a number of seasons now and are finally getting paid really good money. So first and foremost is Bryce Cotton. We've got an MVP caliber player. He's a guy who has made a career in the NBL. Second one, Milton Doyle. He's another guy who has been at the Tasmanian Jack Jumpers now for 2 or 3 seasons. He's been a staple of their sort of identity, their culture, everything they've built has been built around Milton Doyle. And the third one is a guy who came into the NBL guns blazing, sort of died off a little bit, but last season found some form. That's Tyler Harvey. So when we look at imports around the league, that's only 3 guys that I can think off the top of my head who have really stuck around for a number of seasons now and are starting to make a name for themselves. So Parker Jackson Cartwright will be another one who'll throw his name into that sort of category as well because he's staying around for a second season. But I think the biggest thing when we touch on the NBL, and it's the only thing that really holds the league back, I think, as a whole, is the money's not there right now. So there's a lot more money playing in Europe. There's a lot more money playing in China, Japan, all those other leagues. So if you're a guy who's motivated by money, the NBL is probably not going to be the league for you. But if you're a guy who's motivated by a strong league, maybe making the NBA, still relatively good money, an English speaking nation and country, and I think having success as well in a second or third best league in the world, I just think it's going to be very interesting to see, how they sort of go from that going forward.
Very much so. DJ Hogue, Josh, is someone you think they're going to miss quite a lot.
Yeah, I think they're going to miss him, but I also think it would be good to see the back of him as well, especially in a Sydney Kings uniform. I think, he came in obviously to the Sydney Kings from the Cairns Taipans as a top 5 player in the league. And I think it obviously does come back to, and we've spoken about this sort of small market team in terms of you get the chance and the ability, if you're a really good player, to really star in those sort of environments. And we saw with DJ Hogue under Adam Ford, he starred. So he obviously came to the Sydney Kings with a shoulder complaint, back injuries, leg injuries. He was just banged up realistically and only played 16 games last season. So very disappointing for him and obviously for what they thought they would bring in obviously with DJ Hogue. He still had averages of 14.4 points per game, 5.3 rebounds and 3 assists. So still very serviceable statistics for a guy who was in and out of the rotation. Wasn't really a starter when he came back in from his injuries, especially for that midway point and the end of the season as well. So good statistics. That's the guy you're going to get. I heard a lot of rumors last season, though, with speaking to people, and these could be completely wrong, but I trust these people have been speaking to. He was a bit of a party guy. So we do, but he was a bit of a party guy, apparently. So it wasn't all about basketball, and I think that was a bit of the move involved, obviously, from going from Cairns to Sydney in a bit more of a central sort of location, have a bit more fun, let the hair down, all that sort of stuff. Whereas obviously up in Cairns, you're very isolated. It's probably all about basketball in a local pub, realistically, unless you're traveling. So
Pina coladas.
I think that was a big sort of... Exactly right, mate, and a couple of crocodiles and all that sort of stuff as well. So, when we're touching on obviously lifestyle, the Sydney Kings and Cairns Taipans are, it's white and black. So, yeah, I think there was a lot of things floating around about DJ Hogue. And the other import that I'm going to touch on quickly as well before we sort of wrap these sort of outs is Denzel Valentine. So, Denzel, former Chicago Bull. I'm a diehard Chicago Bulls fan. Back in the day, he was sort of seen as a very good player coming through. Had a very terrible career, must be said, in the NBA. Came over with a lot of promise, though, I thought. I think a lot of people were talking him up as this is a guy who could go out there and average close to a triple-double, and we saw that. We did see that, and that's what was so disappointing. But you'd go out there and see a guy who'd nearly give you a triple-double, and then against the New Zealand Breakers, midway through the season, scored 0 points. Scored 0 points. So, he still finished with averages of 12.2 points per game, 5.3 rebounds, 3.9 assists, and shot at 39% from the field. But it's what he did produce, I guess, maybe the lack of production on the consistency side. That's a really big shame, I guess, for the Sydney Kings, because when you look at Jalen Adams, Denzel Valentine, and DJ Hogue coming into this team, it did look like they were all but bound for a three-peat coming into NBL 24.
Yeah, I think it's with Valentine, it was exactly that. I think they really thought that they were going to have this heavy 1-2 punch with Jalen Adams and Valentine, and even Hogue. They could have had 3 sort of really, really prolific scorers on the same roster. But that could be exactly what the problem was as well, because you're looking at 3 guys that had the potential to score 20 a night, and even did some nights. On their nights, they were up, scoring 30. But if you don't have the chemistry between it, or you don't work out the right system where these guys, especially as when you're talking about imports that want their minutes, they want to be the centerpiece, they want to be the guy, but you put 3 of them on the same roster because you've got the cash to, but you don't find the chemistry. So I think that is the problem, and maybe that it's obviously why they've moved on from. Yeah, they kept their number one guy who seemed to hold it together and play probably the most consistent in Jalen Adams, and he obviously was also extremely clutch. I think in a lot of games there when they needed points, Jalen Adams was the guy that consistently stood up and got them out of trouble or got them in wins, because they played in plenty of shootouts last year where they were really, really high scoring games. So I think, with Hogue, you put him in the same category as Valentine, where we're both 12, 15-point scorers on average, getting a few rebounds, a few assists, but didn't really step up to the level. But maybe because there wasn't the space. And when we go into who they brought in, I think we're going to be talking more about better fits for the teams and using their import spaces to find guys that are actually going to work in a decent system instead of sort of locking horns and clashing heads and trying to be the number one guy maybe.
Yeah, definitely. One more player that I want to touch on as well before I touch on another sort of, I guess, Humie, you probably could call him. I'll touch on him very soon, but is Jalen Galloway. Now, Galloway was a guy who left midway through the season, I believe it was. I don't think he played in the play-in game, but he went over and signed a deal with the Milwaukee Bucks on a 2-way contract. Now, for people who know Galloway, he is exciting, explosive, incredible. He's really starting to develop now. Averages last season, 10.3 points per game, 3.4 rebounds per game, 1.4 assists per game, shot 54% from the field last season, was an absolute staple in my Supercoach team to start the year last year, raised some quick cash for myself and was putting up some consistent points as well. So when you look at a guy like him, the biggest question, and it's been released and I guess reported on very recently that he has been cut from the Milwaukee Bucks team. So he may be an out currently because he hasn't officially signed back with the Sydney Kings, but there is a very good chance that he does sign back with the Sydney Kings in their last roster spot. So I just want to make that known, but at this current stage, as recording, he isn't out for the Sydney Kings. So he's massive because when we're touching on young talent, I think he is up there with some of the most exciting young talent that we've got in the NBL, but I think it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. But the second thing that I wanted to touch on, and I mentioned him off the top. Now, obviously, it's been announced very recently. I think it was in May. I think it might have been that Paul Smith, the majority owner for the last couple of seasons, the selfless man that he is. All puns aside, mate, that is not even close to what this guy is. He is, I think, the biggest dropkick, bully, entitled person, self-centered freak, I think, in the NBL. He people will say things about him. He was happily to respond on Twitter. Mate, you have got enough money to not care about what anyone says about you. Just keep on living your life. So I think the biggest out for them in terms of a positive is him being now a minority owner of the team. So a lot of these decisions and a lot of these sort of processes that he has put in place over the last couple of seasons, yes, they've been successful, but will be sort of faded out slowly as well. So I hope they become a more humble team because I think he got to last season and really thought, it doesn't matter what coach I bring in. Coach Mahmoud Abdel Fattah wasn't the coach to bring in last season. He brought him in. You know, they brought in some of these players. Oh, DJ Hoke, he'll come down for a good time, mate. It'll be fine. Denzel Valentine, former NBA player, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be good. We're going to win this. We're going to dominate again. They got smacked in the face to that mid part of the season, and so did Paul. So, yep, Paul, as a Perth Wildcats fan, mate, and you've had some comments about the Perth Wildcats over the years, mate. I couldn't have been more happy to see you guys fail last season, and obviously I couldn't be more happy to see you become a minority owner for the Sydney Kings as well, mate. So good riddance and goodbye for me. Thanks, mate.
Man, I hope I never get on the back end of one of these hard rants that you do, man. They are brutal. I'm staying on your good side, man. Jeez.
Yeah, all of
mate.
If anyone would like to debate Josh in one of these shows as well, just hit us up on the gram and we'll set you up so you can have a one-on-one with him.
I will happily join an Instagram live stream, boys, and I will happily speak to anyone about any topic because you can even throw the great Andrew Bogut in that discussion as well with Paul Smith at the start. I think Bogut's got a little bit better as the seasons have gone on, but mate, we're speaking of a guy who's got a massive head as it already is, and he's making it only bigger when he talks about himself and his own franchise. So, yeah, I think the Sydney Kings got a massive, I guess, reality check last season, and I couldn't have been more happy as a Perth Wildcats fan. But I guess we're doing this podcast, boys. We're as unbiased as possible, aren't we?
Yeah. Let's move on.
We're not. Players into the team. And before I actually touch on the players, you did mention the coach, Abdel Fattah, got the boot last year, and they have brought in now Boomer's ex-coach, Brian Goorjian. Josh, how do you see him kind of taking on this team off the back of the Olympics and possibly, I don't know, I'd call it almost a failure of the Australian team with regards to them only getting second in the group due to some other teams not being very good. How is that going to translate to NBL, and what's the feeling around Goorjian for this team?
Yeah, Gorge is obviously viewed by many as the greatest NBL coach of all time. So when we're talking about that, it's an exciting re-signing in the NBL, I think, is the best way of putting it. It's interesting he's gone back to the Sydney Kings after obviously spending some time at Illawarra. Let's just look at the Illawarra time, for example. He was such a great coach for them, and we saw what he did in those 2 or 3 seasons. To then obviously see them fall away was just such a shock to so many, because it looked like he had sort of created a great little super team there in Illawarra. So he's going to come with some great players who are coming back into the Sydney Kings. Like, I'm looking forward to talking about some of these ins. So he's going to come back, and he's the most winningest coach in the NBL. It sounds so weird saying that, but that is how it is actually said. And I think he's going to do amazing things in the NBL. He knows the league. He knows how it works. I think he's got a really great support system around him as well. And yeah, I think there's a bit of a question mark around Gorge, though, obviously after the success that the Boomers didn't have, especially at these Olympics and the failed Olympic campaign, like you just mentioned there, Ryan. So it's going to be interesting. I think they needed to get rid of Abdel Fattah and obviously bring in Gorge because, it's a massive signing for the Sydney Kings as well. We're touching on ins.
Now, Jez, Xavier Cook's probably the biggest signing, one of the biggest signings for the Kings. What's your take on them adding him to the team?
Yeah, man, like not just probably the biggest signing for the Sydney Kings. He's probably got to be the biggest, clearly the biggest signing in the NBL this season, 100%. And probably one of the biggest signings to get him back into the NBL at this stage of his career is a huge move from the Sydney Kings, and probably has a lot to do with Gorge coming in and being the coach, you would presume. Maybe not after he got dropped from the Boomers squad before the Olympics, but you would think it would have had a pretty big role, and you would think, being the caliber of coach that Gorge is, that it would have been very open dialogue there of the reasons why. So you wouldn't think there's too many hard feelings there. But obviously, the last time he played in the NBL, he was in the team where the Sydney Kings, they won 2 titles in the 2 years that he was there. And he was the MVP of the league, MVP of the finals. He's a guy, obviously, that is a threat everywhere, both offensive and defensive. So, like, I just think the only sort of question mark is that he, I don't know, didn't really seem to, on his ventures out, obviously chasing an NBA contract. He did play a few games, 10 games, I think it was total in the NBA, put up some okay numbers, but sort of really failed to break it in, and then goes and plays in Japan and was averaging 14.2 points per game, 8 assists. You would sort of expect a caliber player like Cooks to probably do a little bit better in Japan than maybe what he did, I think, like offensively. But it is obviously still a good league, and it is bringing in they do have a lot of good players because of obviously being able to throw around a little bit more cash. But yeah, I think it is still, it's a huge signing, and it'll be interesting to see now how he backs up having such a prolific prolific name for himself in the NBL, to how he then goes about it and starts off his year, if he's going to be straight up that guy and just drop, 20 points a game and still sort of be pushing for a 2010 type of statistic level, which we think obviously he can do. So it's going to be really interesting to see how he breaks into the NBL, and really importantly, say maybe those first 5 to 10 games are going to be huge.
Josh, Cam Oliver into the team as well. Give us a bit of background on Cam and how he's going to fit into this team.
Boys, you're in for a treat. That's all I'm going to say. Space Cam is back. So when I think about, watching the NBL a couple of seasons ago when this league was starting to explode, I think back so much to the Mike Kelly-led Kansas, Scott Machado, DJ Newball, and my boy Space Cam. Now, when I heard there was rumours he was coming back to the NBL, I sat there and I was like, far out. I hope Perth will actually have a crack and actually try and get this guy over, because his most recent season in the NBL was back in NBL21. He put up 17.3 points per game, 10 rebounds, and 1.2 assists per game. Now, I'm going to throw you 2 of, 5 of these in particular games where he had very similar stat lines. So his best game as an NBL player for the Cairns Taipans, he put up 27 points and 19 rebounds to go with 3 blocks. And then his second best game of that season as well, he put up 25 points, 16 rebounds to go with 4 blocks. So when I tell you this guy is going to come in and dominate this league, he's going to kill it. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do, because in his most recent season, he's been playing over in China. He's put up 12.7 points per game, 7.7 rebounds per game, 1.7 assists, just under a steal per game, and just over a block per game. So he stuffs the stat sheet in so many different ways. I think he's going to work tremendously with Xavier Cooks. I think they'll both sort of sit just off that keyway and be really good pick and roll. Potentially Oliver's a little bit better of a pick and pop sort of player. This is a guy who featured on Sports Center back in the day when the NBL was just starting to explode as well, with some major posterizing dunks. I just think it's going to be super exciting to see Cam back in the league. And when I touch on my favorite player coming into NBL25 outside of Bryce, it's definitely going to be Space Cam, but it just sucks that he's on the Sydney Kings.
Yeah, I really think, he's going to be huge. And like I was sort of saying when we were talking about what they're doing with their imports, I think this is exactly the point I'm making, is like they've brought in a guy that's going to work with Xavier Cooks, who's going to be their biggest threat. And then you put another guy down low that has this type of presence and can be easy a double player. And you're going to be working Cooks off Oliver off Cooks, a little bit sort of like what we saw with maybe Gary Clark and Froling at the end of the season last year, where they a lot of the time were almost unstoppable in the games where the Hawks were really firing. Obviously, this even takes that to a whole nother level, because you're going to have these two guys just working hand in hand, and it can be possibly unstoppable, I think. So yeah, it's going to be crazy to see how these two guys work together and push the Kings forward, because it could be scary in some games.
All I'm going to say is quickly is, sorry Ryan, but all I'm going to say is just think Alan Williams, but on steroids. That's what this guy is. He is a freak. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if he is potentially an MVP player this season. I'm so excited to see him back in the NBL, because I think when he was in here, it was starting to really have a buzz about it, and it's great to see him return to the Sydney Kings.
I'm a little bit worried, boys. So, the stats and stuff you pulled off, Josh, how many years ago is that? 3-4 years ago?
3 years ago now.
3 years ago. And then he's gone to China, not putting up the same numbers in a worse league. He's 28 years old. I think he'll be 29, or he's a July, so he's just turned 28. Big men don't get better as they age. So, I hope he's great. Because I love watching a big man just dominate on the court. But I'm worried that his best days are behind him, and the expectation on his shoulders coming into the league to be the athletic, dominant big man as he was back then, it's going to be too hard in one of the biggest markets of the NBL.
I'll say this right now to you, Ryan. He's going to be the starting center in the All-NBL team this season, and I think you can put your bottom dollar on it. I think he's going to come in again. He is a highlight player. He's going to be a guy who I think is going to average 15 and 10 this season. I think he's going to be, the most impactful, strongest highlight film sort of guy in the NBL, and I'm super pumped to have him back in there. But I can understand where you're coming from, but I just think, let's just say that again, mate. 27 points, 19 rebounds. Only a couple of seasons ago. He went to the NBA. He's played against some bigger bodies. I can see your questions, mate, but this guy's a freak.
I think we need to put a wager down here, boys. Yeah. I don't think we can let this segment go. We need to set something. We're betting men, I presume. Let's find some common ground here and put down a wager, first season wager of, I don't know, do we do it with a stats line? Do we do it with the All-NBA team? What are we doing?
I want to take Josh's throwdown about starting center in the All-NBL. I'll put $20 that he's not. I don't think he won't make the team.
Wow. I'll happily take $20. I would have raised you to 50, mate, but I'm happy with 20. I think I am almost certain that this will be the starting center in the NBL, and I hope that they actually figure it out this season, because I was disappointed to see 4 guards last year in the All-NBL team, with obviously the new format that's been going on. So I think, mate, this guy is a guy who, all things considered, if the body is in shape, he will be a better player than what Alan Williams has been the last couple of seasons. He will be the starting center, boys. I'll happily take that.
Now we're starting if the body's in shape. Anyway.
No ifs to me. This guy, I'll nearly double down with you, mate. He's going to be an MVP candidate. He'll be in the top 3 as well. So I'll throw that down there as well, mate. I'll have that $20 on that.
All right, let's move on to some. There are other players in this team as well. I want to touch quickly
Not
on
anymore.
Not as
Buld
good.
Qual. Played
Yeah.
a fantastic Olympics for South Sudan, and has been a guy that's been kind of maturing on court and growing in his game. I don't know which one of you boys want to kind of back me up on this one, but how do you see the recruitment of Qual as a player on the court? But what does he bring with this kind of now the following of the South Sudanese players? What's that going to do for Sydney as well around the kind of the following and the fandom around them?
Yeah, I think
I'll
it's.
you go.
You go, Josh.
Sorry,
No,
that was
you
my
go.
fault,
You
boys.
go. You go.
I should have said first.
No,
Josh,
I'll
you
be
go.
very quick here, Jez, and I'll throw it back to you straight away. But yeah, I've been very bullish on Bull Qual. I think he, like you mentioned,
Bullish
KD
on
a few
Bull
weeks
Qual.
ago said, KD a few weeks ago said this guy should be in the NBA. So that's the sort of level player that he is at in terms of where he's going to sort of eventually hit. I think when he hits his peak. He's a former Rookie of the Year. Last season, 12 points per game, 3.1 rebounds, 1.7 assists, just shy of 1 steal per game. Played 27 games last year. I just think the only question that I've got for Qual going forward is can he stop fouling so much, especially early on in the game. So he's very prone to 2 or 3 fouls in the first half, if not even the first quarter. So he does push himself out of games sometimes very early. But mate, he is a 3-and-D threat, and yeah, Jez, have your say, mate, because he's going to be.
I think it's definitely that. Like he's been brought in. You know what you're going to get, say on the offensive side of the ball. He's pretty consistent in his figures of. Yeah, he's going to get between 10 and 15 points. He's going to give you 3 or 4 rebounds a game. But it's the defense. He can shut anybody down. And I think, like you mentioned, KD, there's plenty of players and coaches in the organization in basketball that now know who Bud Qual is because he can shut down anybody. So I think that's obviously why Gorge has brought him in, is because he's probably up there as probably a top 5 defender, at least in the NBL. And you need that if you're going to win a championship, because you need to be able to shut down the opposition's key men and all these sort of speedy small imports or even the big guys as well. So I think you get that with Qual, and it's a very, very, very important piece.
But I think Gorge will sort his foul trouble out. We've seen similar instances for players on the Boomers team that for a lot of years have gotten into early foul trouble, but now he's kind of righted that ship, I'd say. So I think Qual's in a good spot to remedy those things. Jez, a couple of other players that have joined. I'm not even going to try to pronounce Kelly's last name, but him and Tyler Robertson. Give us your thought on those boys.
Lou Pepe, I think it is, right, Josh? You're usually the vocal.
I handled this one as quickly as I possibly could, mate, because there's not a chance I'd got that right.
Leo Pepe, say we can.
I think
say
it's
that.
Leo Pepe. I'm
anyway,
pretty sure.
Leo Pepe, Pepe Le Pew, we can call him now.
Sounds French, but have a look at this bloke, guys, if you get a chance. He is an absolute specimen.
He is an absolute monster. Comes in from, he's a local talent, and I think, and same with Tyler Robertson, who I'll go into after. Both local Aussies that moved over pretty early, had some pretty impressive high school careers, and then moved over and played college basketball in the States. And both put up good numbers, but Pepe Le Pew is no Pepe Le Pew. He's 108 kilograms. The max bench is 180 kilos. He's an absolute monster. So obviously brought in to be a presence. He's going to be in the rotation, and I think when they need someone that can certainly block out and make it very, very difficult to come into the paint and get rebounds, we're going to see Kelly come in. And it's also, I think, really important that he comes in because his relationship with Gorge's brother, Kevin, was Kelly Pepe's coach, and he was also played on the same team as Tyler Robertson in high school. So I think that connection is really, really interesting because, you've got two really sort of young talents that have been brought into the Sydney Kings team. And like what we said, it's really, really important to build this core of local talent that are going to stay for a long time. And I think these guys have come in there, obviously still, probably following a dream of wanting to play in the NBA. And they're not going to come here and just sort of play 1 or 2 years. They're in here to play under Brian Goorjian and develop as players. And then, maybe look to get another shot or have a crack at the NBA in a few years' time, because you've brought in, Kelly LePepe and then Tyler Robertson, two very different style players. Robertson's more of a shooting guard. He's going to put up his 3 seasons playing for the Portland Pirates in the NCAA. He put up 15.8 points, 5.4 rebounds, and 4.3 assists. So you've got a guy that can not only score, but can be a really, really good service player. And still young and still very open to development. Anything you read about Tyler Robertson in the media since he signed is definitely, hey, I'm here as a player. I'm happy to play whatever role, but I'm also here to develop and to really sort of work on his game. So I think that's really, really important. They've brought in 2 really young Aussies that are here to learn and develop and be better players, and could be potentially the core of the Sydney Kings for, who knows, the next 5 years. You just sort of never know what happens in their careers. So I think he's a really, really big signing, and Kelly is a really, really big signing, if you excuse the pun.
All puns intended on this show.
All puns, that's right.
We touched on the 2024 campaign for the Kings, and we kind of picked out a few things that needed to work on or fix to be successful in 2025, or the NBL 25 rather. We spoke about leadership, coaching, imports. I think consistency is probably one of the biggest things, Josh. Do you think they've remedied through their player movement around that consistency area?
I think so. I think they've gone out and grabbed some really good talent. I guess the thing is with what I touch on imports, and I mentioned it in last episode with the New Zealand Breakers, I love to see players who have been in the NBL and have played in this particular league, because it's not like many other leagues around the world. And that's why I have my questions when it's a former NBA player or a former NBA G League player or a European player. So I think what they've done is obviously gone out and signed the biggest names, the Cooks, Oliver and Qual, who have all been very, very solid to serviceable players, or even MVP caliber players in the NBL. So that's a major tick for me. Obviously gone out and got Brian Goorjian, who knows how to coach in the NBL. Another major tick. They've brought in a lot of young players to replenish the local talent with guys like Angus Glover, Jordan Hunter, who have left the team, who have obviously been staples of this franchise for a number of seasons now. I just look at what they've done this off-season so far before NBL 25, again, making Paul Smith a minority owner. I just think everything is trending again in the right direction. And I think it's been the best off-season so far from what we've talked about, I think. And it's clear. It's a clear best off-season because, you touch on DJ Hogue, Denzel Valentine, and Jonah Bolden. Yes, 3 massive names, but I think they're going to get more out of Cooks and Oliver than they did with those 3 guys combined. And then obviously you've got Bull Qual on top as well. So I'm really bullish on this team, as much as I hate to say that as a Perth Wildcats fan and supporter. But yeah, they're going to be a massive chance of, potentially winning 3 championships in 4 seasons.
Jez, do you feel they have kind of hit their mark over the off-season with their recruitment? Have they covered all bases, so to speak?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I am definitely on the same line as Josh, saying, yeah, they've probably had the best off-season of any team in the league, and it's even been a bit of a clean out, but it just feels like the combinations that they've brought in are gonna work. So we mentioned, obviously, earlier they had a full clean out last year, and now they've sort of done it again, but the pieces that they kept were really, really important. And the pieces that they've brought in seem to fit so much better. And then you get the coaching of Goorjian, and they needed to really sort of improve on their defense, and they're going to get that through their coaching, because they just played in too many games last season where they were just shooting for their life. So I think what they've done and who they've brought in is the perfect fit. And yeah, I don't know, when the odds come out, I wouldn't be surprised if the Sydney Kings are up there to win the championship, because they're definitely top three. You could almost say with who they've brought in, they got to be, they've very potentially could be the favourite to win NBL25, because they've got all the pieces there. Then they haven't, what they've lost, they've replaced with better fits, 100%.
Well, that's massive for a team that was, as we spoke about earlier, bundled out in the play-in tournament against the Breakers. If we're going to give them a grade, I'll go last. I haven't really followed the Kings off-season so much, so I'll probably just copy one of you boys. Josh, what would you grade the Kings off-season as?
Yeah, I didn't think I was ever going to give this grade out when we were touching on the 10 teams, but I've gotten so excited about this team, and especially obviously Cooks and Oliver coming back in, and Bull Quoll, and obviously the young guys that they've replenished. And Jez was spot on obviously there before. The couple of key guys they've kept, I look at a guy like Jalen Adams and Sean Bruce. Now, they're just staples of obviously this team for the last couple of seasons now. So all those things considered, boys, I didn't think I'd do this, but I'm going to give them an A+. I think it's been the perfect off-season for them. I just think the way that they've brought in NBL ready guys, NBL experienced guys, a former MVP candidate in Xavier Cooks, a up-and-coming defender, Brian Goorjian, everything just seems like it's trending in the direction that they should start favourites of the NBL season, and I think they'll be a clear favourite, and then should be the team that does threaten the top four and win an NBL championship. So an A+ for me, guys.
Yeah, it's huge. I don't know if you can. How do you give an A+, but how do you not give an A+? The only question like that, sit on the fence. Sitting on the fence, because it's like what else does a team have to do to get an A+, I think. But I can't give an A+, so I'm going to give an A.
Well, there you go, straight out of the mouth of the boys there. I'm going to just go one step lower, because I think like playing
you got 20
advocate,
on the line.
Exactly. Gorge is going to run this team into the ground as he did with the Boomers. Going to play Oliver way too many minutes. Going to do a knee. Quoll will be an awesome player. Cooks is going to need too much ball, and it's going to all fall apart around him. So that's my hot take. Someone's got to be bad. There's a lot of other teams coming up, boys. Someone's got to. The weight of expectation will be too much for these guys, in my opinion. But who knows?
Big call, big call, but it's going to be interesting.
Very interesting, to say the least. Well, that does us for the Sydney Kings pre-season preview, NBL25 preview. Up next, we'll be hitting the Illawarra Hawks as we move closer to the NBL25 tip-off. A couple of teams left to preview. As always, you can find the podcast on any of your podcast platforms, wherever you get them. Give us a listen, give us a follow, give us a like. Josh, where else can you find some great Basketball Fix content?
Yeah, obviously check us out at our website, www.thebasketballfix.com. Search us up on Instagram, The Basketball Fix Podcast. And yeah, like Ryan said there, make sure you obviously follow us and rate, review, and like the podcast as well, wherever you get your streaming services from, because a lot is coming up, and it's going to be a massive, massive NBL25 season from us at The Basketball Fix.
We are definitely looking forward to it. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Thanks for listening. And this is your Basketball Fix.
Turnover at halfway. Oh, yes, sir. Clock at 10. Adams the off balance. Oh my goodness.